number one interest is ending this war once and for all. Today, we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation.
The recent high-level discussions held in Saudi Arabia between U.S. and Ukraine has set the stage for what many international observers are calling a game changer in the war. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio led a delegation that included top Ukrainian negotiators, meeting in the Saudi capital to hammer out the terms of an interim ceasefire. According to multiple sources, the talks centered on a 30-day cessation of hostilities along both aerial and naval domains. A proposal designed to be immediately implementable and strictly monitored by independent observers. This innovative ceasefire aimed at reducing the constant barrage of missiles and drones over Ukrainian cities such as Kyiv and Kharkiv represents the first time that a comprehensive sector-specific pause in fighting has been negotiated. With the skies and seas quieted, the expectation was that both sides could use the pause as a breather to begin the larger, more complex negotiations concerning territorial disputes and long-term security arrangements. The proposal, though seen by some as a temporary measure, was hailed as a critical step toward de-escalating the conflict and laying the groundwork for a lasting peace. In a dramatic prelude to the Jeddah talks, the Trump administration had recently imposed a stark policy shift by suspending all military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. This move was designed as a high-pressure tactic, an ultimatum intended to force Kyiv to accept concessions and show tangible commitment to the peace process. U.S. officials argued that continued American support was contingent upon Ukraine demonstrating a willingness to negotiate and even consider territorial adjustments. However, as the ceasefire proposal in Saudi Arabia began to take shape, the U.S. administration swiftly reversed its suspension. In a press briefing shortly after the negotiations, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth announced that military support and the vital intelligence streams would be reinstated once Ukraine officially committed to the interim ceasefire and a concrete roadmap for negotiations was established. This back and forth underscored the administration's strategy: leverage American support as a bargaining chip, then restore it as soon as Ukrainian concessions were on the table. The reinstatement not only signaled renewed U.S. commitment to Ukraine's security, but also helped stabilize the strategic balance on the ground, a move welcomed by both European allies and moderate factions within Kyiv. Not long after the Saudi talks were announced, tensions reached a boiling point in a widely publicized meeting at the White House between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In what many observers have labeled as a shocking confrontation, the meeting devolved into an acrimonious exchange of accusations and demands. During the session, Trump pressed Zelensky on several fronts. He accused the Ukrainian leader of failing to fully commit to the peace process by refusing to accept any compromise on territorial losses. "I want them to want peace, right?" Trump insisted, referencing the broader geopolitical challenge of forcing a genuine resolution to the conflict. In response, Zelensky fired back, defending Ukraine's hardline stance on sovereignty and territorial integrity. He underscored that Ukraine's position had always been clear: no agreement could be reached without preserving its essential borders and without direct Ukrainian involvement in the negotiations. This clash, which some analysts described as the most dramatic confrontation between a U.S. and Ukrainian leader in recent memory, not only exposed deep-seated differences between Washington's strategic vision and Kyiv's national imperatives, but also highlighted the immense pressure on both sides. Despite the explosive rhetoric, both leaders ultimately acknowledged the need to return to the negotiating table. Following the meeting, Zelensky issued a public statement via social media reaffirming his country's commitment to a constructive dialogue, albeit on terms that would preserve Ukraine's core national interests. In a move that has drawn both criticism and cautious optimism from international circles, President Trump has taken his negotiating efforts one step further by directly engaging with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Sources indicate that in a recent telephone conversation, Trump and Putin discussed the potential for a peace deal that would fundamentally reshape the contours of the ongoing conflict. During the call, Trump reportedly conveyed his readiness to explore a range of proposals, including the possibility of freezing the conflict along current front lines, a proposal that resonates with the earlier ceasefire talks in Saudi Arabia. Importantly, Trump emphasized that any deal must include reciprocal concessions from Russia, hinting at the need for Moscow to halt its military aggression and agree to terms that might even involve acknowledging some of Ukraine's territorial losses. Putin's response, as gathered from diplomatic sources, was measured yet intriguing. The Russian president expressed a willingness to entertain negotiations with Trump's team, provided that the framework would secure Russia's long-term strategic interests. This includes ensuring that any ceasefire or peace agreement does not force Russia to relinquish the territorial gains it has made in recent years. According to one insider, Putin's primary objective is to preserve the status quo, a frozen conflict that solidifies Russia's control over key areas, while preventing further escalation that might lead to unpredictable outcomes. This direct outreach to Putin marks a significant departure from previous U.S. administration's approaches, which often sidestepped direct engagement with Moscow. Trump's willingness to negotiate face-to-face, or at least via direct communication channels, with Putin signals an attempt to break the traditional stalemate by bypassing multilateral forums and leveraging his personal rapport with the Russian leader. However, this move has not come without its risks, as it may embolden hardliners on both sides and raise concerns among U.S. allies about the transparency and fairness of the process. Sir Keir Starmer has congratulated Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky after Ukraine agreed to a 30-day ceasefire proposal with Russia. The Prime Minister branded the agreement a remarkable breakthrough and said it marked an important moment for peace in Ukraine. Starmer added, "We now all need to redouble our efforts to get to a lasting and secure peace as soon as possible." French President Emmanuel Macron, too, has played a pivotal role in mediating between competing interests. Macron has called for a balanced approach that recognizes the harsh realities on the ground while still upholding the principles of international law and Ukrainian sovereignty. Macron's stance is reflective of a growing consensus in Europe that any lasting peace will require a degree of compromise, both from Russia and Ukraine, that may not satisfy all parties but is necessary to end the cycle of violence. Amid the high-level diplomatic maneuvering, one of the most contentious and innovative proposals emerging from recent talks involves a minerals deal between the United States and Ukraine. This proposal, which has become a focal point in discussions, suggests that Ukraine grant the U.S. access to some of its critical rare earth minerals as part of a broader package to restore military support. Proponents of the deal argue that it provides a tangible asset that could help secure U.S. economic and strategic interests in the region, while also serving as a form of payment for the billions of dollars in aid already extended to Ukraine. Under the terms discussed by Trump's team, this deal would require Ukraine to make certain concessions regarding the control of its mineral resources, concessions that could, in the long term, impact the country's economic sovereignty. For many Ukrainians, the idea is deeply controversial. However, the Trump administration has maintained that without such concessions, the U.S. cannot justify the continuation of its support, which has been critical in keeping Ukrainian forces in the fight against Russian aggression. Ukrainian officials have expressed mixed feelings about the proposal. While some see it as an unacceptable compromise of national resources, others recognize it as a pragmatic step toward unlocking a broader peace process. In a recent statement, a senior Ukrainian aide noted that if we are to have our security guarantees and receive the support we desperately need, we might have to consider innovative solutions, even if they come at a steep price. This sentiment reflects the harsh calculus that Ukraine faces, balancing immediate security needs against long-term economic sovereignty. Trump's shock maneuver, encompassing the Saudi ceasefire deal, the pivot on military aid, direct negotiations with Putin, and the contentious minerals proposal, is set against a backdrop of a rapidly shifting global order. For years, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has been a focal point for debates over NATO expansion, U.S. global leadership, and the future of European security. Trump's approach, characterized by a willingness to leverage personal relationships and unilateral decisions, marks a stark departure from previous administrations' multilateral strategies. The implications of Trump's actions extend far beyond the immediate crisis. Analysts warn that if Ukraine is forced to accept significant territorial or economic concessions in exchange for renewed U.S. support, it could fundamentally alter the balance of power in Eastern Europe. Moreover, the move could embolden other adversaries who see the potential for similar bargains, where strategic support is conditioned on compromising core national interests. At the same time, Trump's critics argue that his approach risks further destabilizing the region. By engaging directly with Putin and pressing for concessions from Ukraine, Trump may inadvertently undermine the unified front that has characterized Western responses to Russian aggression since 2014. There is a fine line between pragmatism and capitulation, one European diplomat commented. If we start making too many concessions, we risk setting a precedent that could be exploited by other authoritarian regimes. Yet, amid these debates, there is a growing contingent, both in Washington and in Kyiv, that believes the current moment offers a unique opportunity to end the war once and for all. For Ukraine, the prospect of a negotiated peace, even if it means accepting some losses, represents a way out of a conflict that has exacted a devastating toll on its people, economy, and national psyche. For the U.S., reinstating military aid and intelligence sharing in exchange for tangible progress on the peace front could serve as a powerful signal of American resolve and strategic recalibration. From Russia's perspective, the ongoing negotiations, including the interim ceasefire and broader peace talks, are seen as a tactical pause that preserves its hard-won territorial gains. Moscow is unlikely to agree to any deal that requires it to relinquish control over regions it considers integral to its sphere of influence. Instead, Russian leaders expect that any final agreement will secure formal recognition of its annexations, or at the very least, allow for a frozen conflict scenario where the status quo is maintained. This approach would not only serve as a validation of its actions over the past decade, but also prevent Ukraine from rejoining alliances like NATO, which Russia views as a direct security threat. Moreover, Russia is likely to use this period of negotiation to recalibrate its international posture. By engaging in talks, Russian leadership hopes to shift the global narrative, portraying its actions as defensive and strategic rather than aggressive. This recalibration could include lifting some economic sanctions or securing long-term economic concessions that help stabilize its economy amid the prolonged conflict. Essentially, any compromise would be leveraged as a way to maintain its strategic depth, while ensuring that the West, particularly the U.S. and European allies, remains divided and less committed to an uncompromising stance against Moscow. Additionally, from Moscow's point of view, these negotiations provide an opportunity to reshape the future regional order in its favor. The Kremlin is expected to push for a comprehensive peace framework that not only freezes the current conflict but also institutionalizes security guarantees that prevent future Western encroachment. By insisting on a deal that cements Russia's influence in Ukraine, it aims to legitimize its actions and present itself as a power capable of imposing a new geopolitical balance in Eastern Europe. Ultimately, Russia expects that a carefully negotiated agreement will allow it to consolidate its gains, reduce international pressure, and position itself for long-term strategic advantage. As the ceasefire in Saudi Arabia takes effect and negotiations continue to unfold behind closed doors, the international community watches with bated breath. On one hand, the renewed dialogue between the U.S. and Russia, facilitated by Trump's direct outreach, raises the possibility that the decades-long conflict could finally be brought to a close. The interim measures, such as the proposed aerial and naval ceasefires, offer a window of opportunity for both sides to regroup and prepare for comprehensive negotiations. On the other hand, deep-seated mistrust between Russia and Ukraine, compounded by the hardline stances of key domestic actors in both countries, means that any peace deal will likely be fraught with complications. Ukrainian President Zelensky has made it abundantly clear that any agreement must preserve Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, a demand that is at odds with Moscow's insistence on recognizing its annexations and concessions. Moreover, the issue of a minerals deal adds another layer of complexity, as it forces Ukraine to weigh its long-term economic independence against immediate security needs. In recent statements, U.S. officials have emphasized that the ceasefire and accompanying measures are not a final settlement, but rather an initial step, a pause designed to create the space for detailed, binding negotiations. This is not about giving up. It's about stopping the bloodshed and creating a platform from which real peace can be negotiated, said one senior Trump administration official. However, critics warn that any misstep in these delicate negotiations could reignite hostilities, undermining the fragile progress made in Saudi Arabia. As the ceasefire takes hold and diplomatic efforts gather momentum, the world stands at a crossroads. President Trump's bold, if controversial, initiative to leverage American support as a bargaining chip and his willingness to engage directly with Putin has opened up new possibilities for ending the Russia-Ukraine war. The combination of immediate practical measures, such as the naval and aerial ceasefires, and the potential for comprehensive negotiations, including the contentious minerals deal, offers a path forward that, if successfully navigated, could finally bring lasting peace to a region long marred by conflict. Yet, significant challenges remain. Deep-rooted mistrust, divergent national interests, and the high stakes of any territorial or economic concessions mean that the negotiations will be fraught with complexity. Both Russia and Ukraine are under immense domestic pressure, and external actors, from European allies to international organizations, will be watching every move. For now, though, there is a sense of cautious hope. The message from Saudi Arabia is clear. A new phase of dialogue has begun, one that could ultimately end the bloodshed and transform the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe. As President Trump and his team press forward, the coming days and weeks will be critical in determining whether this shocking move can indeed end the war forever. In the words of one senior U.S. diplomat, this is a moment of reckoning. The decisions we make in the next few days will not only shape the fate of Ukraine, but could very well redefine the rules of international diplomacy in the 21st century. With renewed U.S. support and a potential breakthrough in ceasefire talks, the hope is that history may finally turn a page on one of the most protracted and devastating conflicts of our time.